Today, Dr. Pierce is going to talk about why sleep is so important to our health and why it should be non negotiable and how we can get better sleep, because I think a lot of us really need to hear more about that. What do you say, Dr. Pierce?
Well, you're absolutely correct, Amy, and I think it's a part of our health and our wellness that we feel that socially it's acceptable to sort of just say, oh, it's not all that important, and sometimes even socially unacceptable to say, I really need 8 hours, or I don't function, or man, I got 9 hours last night, because you're wondering, are they going to think I'm lazy? Are they going to think that I don't care about my job, or because I wasn't working late into the night on things, or waking up early to get back into it? And so it's funny, this I guess habit and process that's been with us for so long throughout human development, sleep, and animals do it and humans do it, but we have this negative connotation to it. So I think it's really important that we're talking about today, because there's huge benefits of getting good sleep, and of course a lot of risks if we're not getting the sleep that we should be getting.
Yeah, I agree about the social aspect, especially. There are times, I mean, I've even done it sometimes in the past where somebody might wake me up because they woke me up early because they were in a different time zone or something. And they say, "Did I wake you?" And we always say, "Oh, no, no." Meanwhile, your voice is like, "Oh, of
Obvious
course
that
they woke you up." And you shouldn't be embarrassed about being sleepy. It's not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of good health if you're sleeping.
for
So I
sure.
wanted to start off with our game of true or false.
It's time for True or False on Be Green with Amy Live. Answer true or false to Amy's questions in the comments below, and Amy will ask our guest for the expert answer.
Okay, I think the first one I want to talk about, which I like a lot, is true or false. The Guinness Book of World Records no longer recognizes any attempts to hold a record for lack of sleep. So, Green Warriors, you type in your guess. And Dr. Pierce, what do you want to say about that?
Well, as this was something that is, I think, pretty fascinating to know and to learn about, because in the Guinness Book of World Records, it holds everything from who's the tallest person and et cetera, to who can do some of the craziest things, like jumping out and falling the most feet before landing safely, and things like that. And they've actually put a ban on trying to. They no longer will basically recognize people who are trying to break the record for the most number of days without sleep, because it is actually extremely dangerous. And if you don't sleep for enough days in a row, people lose touch with reality, start to hallucinate, and eventually die. Actually, and it's been shown in animal models and studies, and in history books. When you look at people who've done it, that's an extremely risky thing to do, to try not to sleep for days on end. And it's a little fuzzy of what the longest stretch has been, but maybe somewhere around 20 days. And people can fast for 30, 40, up to, I think the record for fasting without eating any food was up to 300 plus days, 380 days, something crazy like that. But just 20 or so days, and can lead to someone's death, and probably even sooner. So don't try to break any records. Guinness Book's not going to recognize it. But what's I think the take home message from this is that it's important. Shift workers are dealing with this all the time. The other night I was on call on labor and delivery, and it is certainly an honor and such a special chance to be at a delivery and to help women and their babies in those first moments of life. But it's also waking up at 2 in the morning, and if you were asleep anyway, but if you were waking up and your heart's racing, you got to run down the hall to help with an emergency. Shift it's tough on the old system. And studies have shown, even with a single night, which is fascinating, especially in lieu of the fact that we as as a nation are sleeping less, maybe 20-25% less than maybe our great grandparents or something a couple generations back. Um, and so we're sleeping on a daily basis less, not getting that 7 to 9 hours of what's recommended. But even a single night can have really significant findings, such as a decrease in a major decrease, like 70% decrease in the action of our natural killer cells, which is part of our immune system that is responsible for recognizing uh, things in our body that don't belong there, such as new cancer cells. And this is probably part of the mechanism why you see increased cancer risk for people who are not sleeping enough. Actually, I learned recently that the WHO has listed shift work, so like nighttime shift work, as a potential carcinogen. Basically, something that increases our risk for cancer is working in a job where we just don't get good sleep at the right time. So uh, sleep is tied into how long we live, how well we live, whether we're living with a bunch of diseases or whether we're living disease free. And even if we're living quote unquote disease free, how are we? How good's our memory? How are we going to remember things from the day before? How are we going to perform on our tests? How well are we going to perform on a race? And so it affects, just about every aspect of our lives.
Yeah, and that's why I wanted to start off with that true or false, because we were talking about how people are kind of embarrassed if they took a nap or if they're, sleeping, and if they didn't stay up late. And I really wanted you to tell us about how important it is for sleep, because it's something, it's one of the pillars of health. So it's very important. And most people that are watching are probably interested or on a plant-based diet, and they think that that is going to be everything that they need to get good health. But there are so many other pillars, and sleep is one of them that's just so important. And I'm glad that you helped us talk about that as far as how important it is.
For sure, right. No matter how many blueberries and how much kale you put in your smoothie this morning, if you slept for 2 hours last night, you're not going to function optimally.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so we have another question, and this is true or false. Drowsy driving is similar to driving while driving under the influence of alcohol. Okay, Green Warriors, put in your guess, and Dr. Pierce, go ahead.
Great. So this is a very pertinent question, again, tied to the particularly pertinent to those of us in the medical field, where you see people coming off these long shifts, and you were working to save somebody's life overnight on your shift, but then you can be in a car accident on the way home because your reaction times are down, your judgment's down, that you can end up a patient, or worse, put somebody else in the hospital after you worked all night trying to help people get out of the hospital. So yes, drowsy driving can be similar to driving under the influence of alcohol. And it is not just true for people doing shift work, of course, because so many of us deal with poor sleep. And some of it is just because of our sleep habits, what we call sleep hygiene. And we're definitely going to talk about that today. But some of it is from medical conditions that we're living with, right? We have bad rheumatoid arthritis, so we have pain, and so therefore we don't sleep well, or we have bad asthma or emphysema, so we don't breathe well, so we don't sleep well. So those are tied together as well. And then some, yeah. Whether or not it's because you chose to stay up and watch an extra couple of episodes of binge watching on Netflix, or whether it's because you're forced into it because work or because of a medical condition you're living with, you will be less aware and awake and making great decisions the next day. And that can have immediate consequences for people who are working with heavy machinery or while driving.
Yeah, and I think that there are some people that may think that they're getting sufficient sleep even though they're not getting enough, and that they think that they're still going to, that they still can function, they can drive, they can do all these things even though they may not get as much sleep as they should. So I think it's important, because maybe while they're, even though they think that they're getting enough sleep, they're not, and that they're going to be suffering the consequences by having something, maybe something not very desirable happen if they're driving, or even like you were talking about decision making and things like that. So it has a lot of effects on things, and I'm glad that you're here to talk about it.
Sure, I think that's another similarity with being inebriated, being under the influence of alcohol, is that you often you'll hear people say, "Oh, I do fine on 4 hours of sleep the next day," and so there is a lack of awareness of your sometimes in your reduction of reaction time and ability to function. Similarly to where you see somebody leaving the bar, sort of stumbling and saying, "Oh, I'm fine, I can drive, give me the keys." And it takes someone else, sometimes a loved one, a family member, the bartender, to say, no, you're actually not fine. And that's why sometimes people are seeing their doc, talking to their doc about the insomnia, sometimes because of pressure from family members as well.
Yeah, it takes the other people to recognize it sometimes. That's very true. Okay, here's one that I thought was interesting. True or false? During certain stages of sleep, your brain is up to 30% more active than when you're awake. True or false, Green Warriors? Okay, Dr. Pierce.
So while I'm not sure of the exact percentage, I'd say what is a revelation to a lot of people is that, we used to think in the old days that when you went to sleep, the lights, you sort of metaphorically, the lights went out and you were in a comatose state, and things were just kind of like that until you woke up, and then your brain started working again and back to normal. But of course, brain scientists have learned so much in recent years about what's going on in our brains, and that the brains are highly active, doing very important work, essential work during the night when our consciousness is down. And so that one of the biggest and most exciting finds recently was the work. Was the discovery of what is called the glymphatic system, very similar to our lymphatic system in our the rest of our body, that sort of cleans up debris and gets rid of stuff and sort of filters things out. The brain has a similar sort of washing out of the debris that had built up during the day. And it's sort of like the day after, Mardi Gras or a big parade, and early in the morning before the cleaning, or late at night, early in the morning before the cleaning crew comes through, there's, empty soda cans and all sorts of stuff that have been just dumped by the roadside. And then the cleaning crew comes through, and it's beautiful and functional again by the next day. And one of the reasons why this is so exciting is that one of the dysfunctional proteins that is cleared out during this time period by the glymphatic system is the beta amyloid protein, which is a protein that's it seems to be so important and so prevalent in people with Alzheimer's disease. It's actually, in essence, sort of seen in everyone, I guess, with Alzheimer's disease. And so you having poor sleep has been associated with increased risks of Alzheimer's, for example, and other forms of dementia. So definitely when we're asleep, our brain is cleaning stuff out. It's also sort of getting rid of the things, snipping out the things that we don't really need to remember. I don't need to remember the phone number for this company that I called today that I'm never going to call again. It gets rid of that, but it also helps to solidify in some of the deeper sleep, etc., to solidify some of these memories in the rapid eye movement sleep or the REM sleep, to help with creativity and whatnot. So brains are highly active when we're asleep.
Yeah, that's just so interesting, because it really does feel like you just kind of shut down and get unplugged. So it's very necessary to have that amount, the rest, so that we can have those things happening in our bodies.
Sure. And one other thing that you made me think of just there was that some people who have certain kinds of sleep disorders, where that connection, where we don't turn off the physical side so well, and there's still some attachment to what's going on in our brain, are people who sleepwalk or sleep drive or sleep run or sleep cook, and all of these things where they don't have a complete severing of the sort of motor and all the activity that's going on in the brain. And so that's another example of how, obviously things are going on in our brain. And some people who aren't able to make that disconnect are manifesting some of the things that are going on while they're asleep.
Okay, here's another true or false. Sleep disorders are very common in people with mental disorders. True or false? Okay, Dr. Pierce.
So I'm glad that you brought this question up, or this true false question up, because it is very important when someone is experiencing poor sleep, insomnia, etc., to screen for a couple of things. And I look at it in both directions. Both, sometimes people who say, I can't get to bed at night. It takes me forever to fall asleep. And then if I wake up early, too early in the morning, and I just sit there and I'm thinking about all sorts of things. My thoughts are racing. And so sometimes people with poor sleep already have a mental health disorder like anxiety or depression or post-traumatic stress disorder, et cetera, schizophrenia, et cetera. And then the reverse is true, is that people who do not have a mental health disorder, mental health disease, will experience a lot of these symptoms because they have poor sleep. And so if you got the happiest man and woman in the world and made them stay up for 7 nights in a row, they would start to exhibit anxiety, depression, and like we talked about, hallucinations and all sorts of things. That so it's just key for mental health, both for maintaining the clarity in the mental health that you have, and also for helping to work with and treat people who have depression, anxiety, PTSD, etc. If you have horrible sleep, it's going to be hard to help those disorders. So it's very, very common and very important.
Okay, well, we have one more true or false question, and then we'll get on to more things. And those of you that are watching, if you have a question for Dr. Pierce, please put it in the comments, and we will ask it to him a little bit later on in the show. So our final true or false is people need less sleep as they grow older. True or false? Okay, Dr. Pierce.
Very good question. There is a lot of different thoughts, common thoughts and misconceptions about how much sleep we should get, and in different stages of life. And there's actually a nice graph from the National Sleep Foundation that people can look up, that helps break down what the average hours of sleep recommended needed by different age groups. And as you look at the curve, it slowly decreases over time. And so newborns in the 0 to 3 months, as the brain is forming so many new connections and growing, etc., get a recommended, on average, sometimes a little less and sometimes a little more even, but need to get on average 14 to 17 hours worth of sleep. Which is just sounds amazing to think about. If we still needed that at our age, we've got to go to bed if I'm going to get those 17 hours in before I have to go to work. But of course, that is what they need for the developing brain. And it turns out that the brain is still developing and growing in many ways until about age 25. But the majority of it is when we're young. So as a as a school age, where my daughter is, who's 8, the recommendation is 9 to 11 hours. For the teenager, a little bit less, 8 to 10. Adults, the 7 to 9 range that you hear quoted so often. And then older adults from the 65 and above are in the 7 to 8 on average, but sometimes can get away with a little bit less and a little bit more. So, but you see this trend that goes from newborns all the way through to older adults, that little by little we require less. Now, it's a little bit tricky because as you get older, you also don't sleep as well. And so one thing that is important to remember is, if you have as your goal of getting 8 hours of sleep, when we're younger, mostly we can go to bed and our head hits the pillow and we're asleep. And so if we have 8 hours in bed, that often equates close to 8 hours of sleep. But as you get older, 8 hours of bedtime, meaning I'm going to go to bed at midnight and wake up at 8, or I'm going to go to bed at 10 at night and wake up at 6. Um, 8 hours of bedtime does not equate to 8 hours of sleep time, as our what's called sleep efficiency gets worse. And so, your men are waking up more often. Well, both men and women are often waking up more often to go pee at night, either because prostate issues or because of bladder irritation or changes in the bladder tissues as estrogen levels have changed in women, etc. We just don't get into sleep as well as you get older. And so you have to pay attention to that. And you can't just say, well, I'm shooting for 7 hours tonight, I'm going to be in bed for 7 hours. It doesn't work that way. You have to add in extra time of being in bed to account for the times that you're awake and waking up.
Okay, well, that's good to know, because that may help some people if they're still feeling tired and they think that they were getting to bed at a certain time, and then that's maybe not fulfilling what their requirements are. So you talked about infants, newborns, and we talked about the older people. So are there different stages of life where the requirements change?
As far as hours of sleep,
Yeah,
or
yeah, the number of hours that somebody should get.
yeah, and so I think, especially for those of us who are parents or grandparents in charge of how much sleep our kids are getting, that chart from the National Sleep Foundation is helpful, because if you would have asked me without looking at this chart, even after going through med school, and you'd said, "Well, my daughter is 2. What's the recommended number hours of sleep for them?" I wouldn't know off the top of my head. So having this chart to reference is really good. I think it's particularly important as kids are having more access to screen time. Oh,
Mm.
I don't use this, my old iPhone, so you can keep it in your room for watching some cartoons or listening to some music, and that can get away from us. We have to be very careful with screen time, etc. Um, and so having that chart to refer to is great. Just as you see the slow drop off in years per year for the required number of hours of sleep. So the last age group before you get to the 7 to 9 is the teen years, where they're still recommending 8 to 10 hours on average of sleep for teens. And it's interesting that with teens, for example, you switched from when you were a younger school age or adolescent, where early morning awakening is natural for most kids in that age group. So they're able to get up for school a little bit easier. They're a little bit more awake for their first period, etc. Then when you get into teens, there's very frequently the switch in when you the sleep wake time, that it shifted such that teens end up naturally wanting to go to bed later and wake up later. And so if you're still telling them you got to wake up at 5 for swim practice, and then get to your your 0 period of your extracurricular band class or whatever it is, and then all of this stuff is just really counterintuitive or counterproductive as well. And that is why there's a push in some places for later start times in school, especially if you can do it for kids who are in that teen range, so that they're not zombies. And we already talked about how you're just, even if you're able to get to class on time, if you got poor sleep the night before, your brain's a bit of a sieve, and you're not going to have the school performance because you're not able to capture those memories. And a good example that was brought up by Dr. Matthew Walker, one of the leading sleep scientists out of University of California, Berkeley, was a study that showed when they moved the start time for teens, for school for teens, school performance got better, the absenteeism went down, and actually there were fewer road traffic accidents in the, I think, 16 to 18-year-old group, because they were getting better sleep and they were less sleepy at the wheel. So it is important to pay attention to what our body has developed, our body and brains have developed over just so many years.
Yeah, it's just so fascinating that sleep or lack of it can have such an effect on our health in so many areas. I mean, we talked about mental health disorders, and now there are people that are have adopted this lifestyle, and maybe they're one of their goals is to lose weight, and perhaps even if they're really being very good about sticking to it and not going off plan, they may still have some issues, and maybe and they would have a consult with you, and maybe you might check their thyroid. I mean, there's so many things that you would check to see why they're not losing the weight. But could sleep have something to do with it also?
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating because oftentimes, yes, we're focusing on what are you eating during the day? Are you eating more, more plants, which are naturally lower in calories and also boost your post-meal calorie burn, versus are you eating more animal products and junk food? Are you exercising to help maintain your gains, etc. And if we're not careful, we ignore the sleep part. And it's pretty fascinating how sleep can affect weight loss. And so if you're getting good sleep, your body is producing enough leptin, which is a
That's leptin with a P, right?
yes,
Not
LEP.
lectin, like people are worried about lectins.
That's right.
This is a
Yeah,
different thing.
right. The natural hormone called leptin is a satiety hormone. So that when you have a good level of that, it says you feel okay. I've had enough to eat. I'm satisfied. And it also means if you're getting enough sleep that you have lower levels of what's called ghrelin. And that's GHRELIN, and that's a sort of hunger hormone. And so having a lot of satiety hormone, having low levels of hunger hormone, you're just naturally not driven to eat as much. And this is the opposite happens when you don't get enough sleep. Your satiety level hormones go down, your hunger hormones go up. And it's not just like, oh man, I only got 2 hours of sleep. Give me some of that lettuce. We end up choosing worse foods. And there was an interesting study that Dr. Walker's group apparently did as well, where they put people in MRIs and they showed them images of different kinds of foods, and they were sleep deprived, the participants, and so they tended to choose more of the high calorie junk food type things. And then when they were eating those foods again, getting their brains imaged, it looked like the parts of the brain that were lighting up were they had less of the forebrain activity, which is usually that part of the brain that says, no, don't do that crazy thing that you're thinking about doing. There was less of that forebrain activity and more activity in parts of the brain that were parts of like addiction pathways and whatnot. And so poor sleep leads to worse food choices when we're hungry. Seems like in some studies, eating and maybe another 400 or 500 extra calories during the day. We're more impulsive in our food choices, and there's some evidence that if you're losing weight, if you're trying to lose weight while also not getting good sleep, your body's holding on to the fat mass more than the muscle mass. So you might be actually losing more muscle than you are fat in those in those situations when you're not getting enough sleep. And tied into all this, as Dr. Will Bolshewitz has pointed out, tied into all of this is that poor sleep shifts our microbiome towards a a pattern. The microbiome, of course, made up of predominantly bacteria, but also yeast and viruses, archaea, etc. It shifts that microbiome towards a profile that promotes obesity. And so there, in just so many different ways, our body is hijacked from our attempts to get down to a healthier weight if we're not sleeping enough. And so very important to pay attention to that as well.
That is a big deal, because I think that could be helpful to so many people, because there are people that out there that are really battling with the weight loss, and there's just so many things that get in their way. And I don't know if they all knew about the sleep factor. So that's something that we can talk about as far as what we can do about that. So it's very important. So now, if you let's talk. We talked a little bit about brain health. So do you want to talk a little bit more about that, as far as Alzheimer's and dementia?
Sure. We talked. I had the pleasure of being on your show and talking about Alzheimer's and other forms of dementia not too long ago. And I mentioned then that it's near and dear to my heart because of having a family member who had it, and a lot of us have a loved one who have been affected by Alzheimer's disease. And I think part of what is so scary about some diseases is that we often feel like there's nothing that we can do about it. Oftentimes when you're told, well, you have this diagnosis of high blood pressure, but if you lose weight and exercise more and eat more plants and lower the salt in your diet, etc., you can reverse it. Well, that's super powerful. But what's very fearful for a lot of people, especially when they're not maybe looking at all sources of information, they say, oh, well, there's nothing I can do about cancer. I'm just going to get cancer or I'm not. There's nothing I can do about dementia. I'm either going to it's in genes. And as you've so many times, I'm sure on the people who come and talk with you on your show, Amy, is that, genes are part of the equation. They help set up our risk, but how we live our life every day helps to see which genes are turned on and which genes are turned off. And sleep it definitely is part of that as well. Which genes are turned on, which genes are turned off, depends on if we're getting that 7 to 9 hours or if we are missing hours of sleep. And actually, even though this is directly memory, it does make me think of a study where even with a single, I think it was a single night of, oh no, let's see, it was 6 hours of sleep a night for a week. So for some people, they'd be like, 6 hours, that's not too bad. But 6 hours, remember, is 1 to 2 hours less than what's recommended. They saw a change in about 700 genes just from that lack of 1 to 2 hours of sleep per week. And about half of the genes that were upregulated, meaning that were turning on, those were the ones associated with tumor production, inflammation, cardiovascular disease. And then the other half of the genes, they were turned down, and those were immune system related. And so your immune system seemed to be less active. And that's just with, a couple hours lack of sleep a night. And so tying it back to memory and to dementia, we need sleep for trying to stave off dementia. And when you look at people who have chronically had poor sleep, there's an increased risk for dementia later in life. Some of the work that Matthew Walker is doing out of University of California, Berkeley, is saying, well, what can we do in maybe early adulthood, midlife, with our sleep now to try to decrease risk for dementia later in life. And, certainly ongoing research. But one of the benefits of sleep is that it's, of all the things that you're thinking about, like buying healthy plant food, buying a membership to a gym, or even just buying new running shoes, buying various other components of our health and wellness, sleep is free. And so that is available to us, even at the end of the month before the next paycheck is coming. So it's something that we can focus on, and that will help benefit our risk for dementia, as well as all these other conditions that have been talking about today.
Well, very good. So was there any other aspect of health that you wanted to talk about as far as sleep having an effect on it?
Sure. I think one study that I just remembered, tying it back to memory, is they looked at airline pilots, and as a profession, I think airline pilots have poor sleep because of jumping time zones and having jet lag. And they had a little bit smaller areas of the brain that are super important for memory, the hippocampus. And so they had smaller parts of those brains, and the longer they were in the profession of being an airline pilot, the smaller they were. So it's sort of dose dependent. And so if you're seeing a change physically on like the actual size of the part of the brain that deals with memory, when we have when we have sleep deprivation, that's another possible explanation or possible reinforcing of why sleep is important for memory and dementia risk. I think there's also a tie to people who have obstructive sleep apnea, which is the classic person who snores, looks like for multiple times during the night, they stop breathing for a little bit. Their partner has to give them an elbow to make them start breathing again. And they tend to have high blood pressure and sleep and being fatigued and groggy the next day. There's a lot of people with obstructive sleep apnea, and the people who with obstructive sleep apnea who got on treatment and used their treatment, which is usually a positive pressure breathing apparatus called a CPAP, they had lower risk of dementia later in life as compared to those with sleep apnea who weren't on their proper treatment. So one other thing that I guess is worth mentioning about memory, but I think we've done a pretty good job covering how sleep is related to multiple aspects of our life, without going into too much more detail about some of the other conditions. I will mention one more: diabetes, which is so prevalent, and pre-diabetes, which is on the mind of many of us and many of your listeners, is that even with just a handful of days of sleep deprivation in the lab, the fasting sugars first thing in the morning were in the pre-diabetic range for this group of participants. And if, in order to get that pre-diabetic range of sugars, just from weight gain, for example, they would have had to gain 20 pounds in that handful of days. But instead, just by some sleep deprivation of a couple of hours, their metabolic system was so out of whack that they had increased levels of sugar first thing in the morning, probably due to increased cortisol and other sort of inflammatory processes. So it's just important all around. And what I'd like to do, if it works with you now, Amy, is to talk a little bit about how, we've talked a lot, half the show so far, about all the bad things that come around by not sleeping and why it is important to sleep. And I think we should maybe talk about some of the things that we can do to help make sure that we are getting good sleep.
Yes, we need some hope, Dr. Pierce. So go ahead and give us some hope and some good information. That's what we need.
Cool. And I see some questions are coming in, so please feel free to at any point interrupt me and let me know which ones of those you'd like to address.
Okay, well, before you start, I wanted to say that Sky Love said great info, so I wanted to tell you that. And you were talking about sleep apnea. So Rochelle said, once you have sleep apnea, do you always have it? If you're heavy when diagnosed and lose a lot of weight, can that make a difference?
It can. So it is important to know that people can have sleep apnea even with normal weight, and sometimes it has to do with just the tissues in our neck, in the back of our neck, and how they collapse and not when we are lying on our back and sleeping. But oftentimes it is associated with being overweight or obese, and you can see people's sleep apnea get better with weight loss, and also sometimes like different things to help with positioning of the jaw and things like that. So yes, another good reason to continue to work on, for people with sleep apnea, to continue to work on maintaining, reaching a healthy weight, and working with your sleep medicine doctor to see, do I still need the CPAP? Maybe I need it, but I just can put it on different settings and things like that.
Yeah, that's good to know. Of course, we're differentiating between obstructive sleep apnea and central sleep apnea, because the central sleep apnea is more, I guess it's based more on your brain and the signals that your brain give off to your sleeping. Okay. Oh, and let's see. Rochelle said, what are your thoughts of melatonin?
Cool. So melatonin, produced in the pineal gland in our brain, is part of our very complicated collection of hormones and other chemicals and internal body clock, etc., that help us maintain our sleep-wake cycle, our 24-hour clock, etc. And so in the morning, typically our cortisol hormone is high and our melatonin hormone is low. And then you wake up, you get exposure to sunlight, and your cortisol level starts to fall. And little by little, your melatonin builds up and it's higher. Your melatonin level is higher at night when you are naturally, when you are getting ready for bed. That has led to people saying, well, how about if we try melatonin if we're having trouble sleeping? And I think melatonin is definitely a supplement that can be used for sleep. My feelings on it generally are that it's best for special events. So you're making a flight and you're jumping several time zones, and you want to have as little jet lag as possible, taking a low dose of melatonin in addition to doing the other sleep hygiene things that we'll be talking about can be helpful. It's not really something that I prefer my patients to take on a regular basis. There's some theoretical risks with because these are huge doses. Really, the amount that your body produces are very, very small. But we take much larger doses maybe to make sure that it gets in where it needs to get to work. So there's some theoretical concerns about what that does to the developing brain. So giving it to younger kids, do we know what higher doses do chronically? Probably we don't know all the things that can happen from it. Would I prefer a patient taking melatonin 5 times a month as compared to taking a lot of the other sleep medications that are controlled substances with addiction and abuse potential and stuff for sure. But it can help people fall asleep a little bit faster. But I would, as you'll see, the focus hopefully is in general on our daily sleep habits, our sleep hygiene. And then for people who are struggling with insomnia, which is a major deal, a third of people at least have had insomnia at some point, and then maybe 10 to 15% of our population has chronic insomnia, which lasts for months to years. It's a major deal. I think we'll be talking about cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, CBTI, which is recommended as first-line therapy for insomnia over medications and supplements.
Okay, well, why don't we get started in some solutions, because sleep seems to be elusive for so many people and they're looking for a pill of melatonin to make it all happen for them, and it can happen if they follow some advice. So what do you say, Dr. Pierce?
Sure. So I think on one hand, there's thinking about, okay, so how can those of us who in general sleep pretty well, but maybe we are getting less than the 7 to 9 hours, we'll just say less than the 8 hours on average recommended, what can we do to get that? And then there's also a separate group, which are those of us that are suffering with insomnia, that really, like, we get into bed, we stay awake for an hour and a half, we wake up 3 times in the middle of the night, we wake up too early, we're groggy the next day and not able to perform well at work, falling asleep when we're taking care of our kids, falling asleep at the stoplight, etc. So that's a bit of a different group, which will still benefit from the sleep habits that I'm going to talk about right now, but definitely need additional help. It's a good example that I heard recently was you can go to your trainer or your exercise physiologist who's going to give you this great optimization program on how to be prepared for your marathon at the end of the month. But if you have a broken ankle, all of those tips and tricks aren't going to be great until your broken ankle gets better. And so we're going to treat them as slightly different or as separate things. So, but focusing on what the majority of us can benefit from, which is just a little bit more sleep. What are we doing that we could be doing better to maximize that? Here's like some 8 basic steps. Again, this is taken predominantly from Matthew Walker's work. and we can list, maybe Amy, I'll get to you some of the podcast episodes that I recommend people to listen to if they want to get deeper into this. And of course, also Matthew Walker has a great book as well. So
yeah, I'll put a link to his book because it is a fabulous book. I'm going to put a link to that in the show notes and also in the comments if people are interested.
That's great. Yeah, and he has, for people who just want to dip a toe in, he's got a good TED Talk, which is called "Sleep is Your Superpower," and that's like 19 minutes long. If you're not ready to commit to the hours necessary to read the book. And probably also worth mentioning his interview with Rich Roll. Of course, Rich Roll being a very great source for all things healthy lifestyle, but he has a great 2.5 to 3 hour interview with Dr. Walker. Okay, so 8 basic things. Sleep regularity is a big one that makes a difference. So going to bed at the same time and waking up at the same time, 7 days a week. And what a lot of us do are because of the crunch of work and school and getting home late from work, but wanting to enjoy time with family and watch some movies or whatever it is, we'll go to bed late during or at a certain time during the week and wake up very early during the week. But then we'll say we'll just catch up over the weekend, and it actually doesn't work out that way. You can't create a debt and hope to pay it off over the weekend. It doesn't work that well. So try to go to bed the same time every night, wake up around the same time within half an hour or so, half an hour to an hour.
So set an alarm for going to bed.
That can also be helpful. So set alarm on your phone, for example, that gives you a gentle reminder that it's time to go to bed in 15 minutes or whatever.
Yeah, because we're setting alarms for the morning, but we're not setting alarms for the nighttime.
That's right. And then the weekend comes and you don't set alarm at all, and you were so sleep deprived for the last couple of days that you sleep until 10 in the morning instead of waking up at 7:30, and then you're playing catch up and all these. It just doesn't work as well. So sleep regularity, the big one. Next one to think about is sunlight. Believe it or not, we have not been inside our little cubbies and homes in front of computers for all that long, and we have developed, evolved outside, and so waking up when we can, and I know some of this depends on where we are in the year and where we are in the world, but waking in what our jobs are requiring of us, but getting early sunlight, if at all possible, getting outside, getting sunlight into our eyes, as little as 5 minutes might be helpful if it's bright and sunny, or, maybe 30 minutes if it's cloudy and still not all that bright. But trying to get out and get some sunlight early in the day. And then being outside, get outside a little bit in the late afternoon, early evening when the sun is coming down towards the horizon. That also reacts with different neurons in our retina and brain to help let us know that the day is starting to wind down. And then at night, having as little light as possible. And so that could mean candlelight and moonlight for people who want to go hardcore on this, or maybe more realistically for most of us is a low wattage desk lamp instead of a bright fluorescent overhead ceiling light, for example. Screens and the blue light probably plays a role as well, though how much of that is just the raising of excitement and activity from all the things that are happening on those screens and keeping us engaged and awake. But having sunlight in the morning, a little bit of trying to get out as well in the late afternoon or evening, and then low light after sunset. And stop me at any point while we're going through these if you need to. And so another thing that is key is temperature. And so when naturally what happens to help us go to sleep is that our core body temperature cools by 2 or 3 degrees to fall asleep and to stay asleep. And then as we're waking up and our cortisol levels are rising, our core body temperature naturally starts to increase. And so it might be helpful to get warm in the morning to help start the clock. What some people will do, actually, we'll take like a 1 or 2 minute cold shower, which even though it's cold on us externally. It clamps down all of our peripheral blood vessels and sends warmth into our core as a protective measure that helps to warm you up in the morning. Not a lot of us want to take a cool shower in the morning, but a lot of us like the idea of taking a warm shower or hot shower at night, or dipping into a bath or hot tub or something like that. And that helps to do the opposite. It gets you a little bit warm peripherally, but then as you get out, your body starts to cool down, and it helps to drop your core temperature. And so that's helpful. And then having a room that is conducive temperature-wise is one aspect of that. They say oftentimes the optimal degrees temperature might be 65 to 67. So keeping your room cool, if possible. It's kind of hard this time of year where we are. We're going through a heat wave. We don't have any air conditioning in our house, so we have the blinds closed and the fans on, etc. But trying to get that room temperature of 65, 67, and then having some blankets available that you can kick off, or stick your hand or your foot out of to help drop the temperature as you need to, if you're getting too warm from the blankets. So that's temperature. So first was sleep regularity. Second was sunlight. Third was how to maximize temperature. Fourth is what to do if you've been in bed and you haven't fallen asleep. So that's a big deal for a lot of people.
Oh,
We get in bed, our mind's still racing with what we did today, what we didn't do today, what we have to do tomorrow, etc. And if you're not asleep after going to bed, after about 20 minutes, the recommendation is, and the idea is that you're going to bed to go to sleep, by the way, because none of us would sit down at the table when we're not hungry and just stay at the table until we got hungry. Similarly, we shouldn't just get into bed and wait to get tired. So go to bed when you're tired. And if you've been in bed and you haven't fallen asleep in about 20 minutes, get out, do something really boring in another part of the house if possible. So for some people, that's turning on a low light and reading something super boring, doing some stretches, doing some breathing. But you want to associate your bed with sleeping. So in the bed, you should be sleeping, or and you hear during cognitive behavioral therapy, the idea is the bed's not for watching television, not for taking notes, not for paying your bills. It's for sleeping or having sex, and you're
not for eating.
Not for
right?
eating. Right. Your brain should be tuned into what should be happening in bed, and it's not all those other things. So, so that's a good one. The next one is to pay attention to caffeine, alcohol, and cigarettes. Cigarettes is we probably shouldn't be smoking any time of the day, but particularly for those people who are trying to kick the habit, if you have to smoke a cigarette or two, do it early in the day, because nicotine is activating. Caffeine, coffee and tea has been associated with health benefits in the majority of studies. But if you're having caffeine later in the day, and particularly if you're a slow processor of caffeine, you should have your coffee early in the day. Have decaffeinated coffee. Decaffeinated coffee gets rid of about 97% of your caffeine. So there's still a little bit in there, but much less. So if you need to have a coffee later in the afternoon, I'd go with decaf, and there's still health benefits associated with decaf coffee for sure. Then
I find also for chocolate, because
yes.
I have a healthy lifestyle, but I like my chocolate and ice cream, and I have whole food plant-based chocolate cupcakes sometimes. But I'm sensitive to caffeine, and I have to be careful not to have that too late in the evening if I don't have any chocolate.
That's a good point. I'm a big fan of super dark chocolate. So I'm sort of the 85, 90, 100% dark chocolate. And I'll have a square or half a square pretty frequently after dinner. And so I looked that up just to get an idea. And this is roughly, if you eat one square, which is, I don't know, about matchbook size, or a little bit, I guess a little bit smaller. That was about 4 to 5 milligrams of caffeine compared to 95 from a full cup of caffeinated coffee. But when you look at the package, it says a serving size is 4 full squares, which
Ah,
I guess some people will eat 4 full squares, which was about half of the large bar. But if you can get away with having a small portion like a square, then that for many people will be fine. But for people who are particularly caffeine sensitive, you got to be careful with that too.
right, because it can be in your bloodstream like even 5, 6 hours later,
Yeah, yeah,
right?
right. And some people, I think the people who can get away with drinking 5 cups of regular coffee a day and the last one is after dinner and still fall asleep must be super fast processors of
Mm.
caffeine. But then there are other people who can smell coffee brewing as they drive past the Pete's Coffee or the Starbucks, and they're jittery for the rest of the night. It seems like so. So some people are just really slow processing, and know thyself to help you make those decisions.
Right. I probably wouldn't even with chocolate. If I would probably some people it's as early as 2 p.m., but I could probably go maybe 4 or 5 p.m. But if it's after that, I'll try to sleep at night and I'll say, why am I awake? Why am I awake? And then I'll say, oh yeah, I had that chocolate after dinner. So for me, I have it'll stay in my system a lot. But even I think I heard something about that the caffeine can affect your deep sleep quality. So
Mm,
even if you fall asleep, but you may not get deep sleep
okay,
because you're having that and then there's that vicious cycle, right? So you're up all night, right? Because you had that caffeine, and what do you do in the morning when you're so tired and you have to get up? You have
right,
a cup of coffee.
right. And that was kind of a nuanced thing that I learned recently, which was maybe don't have that first cup of coffee right when you wake up, but to try to have it an hour and a half to 2 hours later. And that because many of us get a bit of a well, human biology. There's this like lull in activity, brain activity, and wakefulness at around 3 in the afternoon. And there's some evidence that maybe if you push your morning caffeine to an hour and a half, 2 hours after you wake up, you might be able to help avoid that afternoon lull. Because what a lot of people do during that afternoon lull is have another cup of coffee. And so some things that you can play around with. So personally, and I did this before I learned that, but I'll on a good day when I have the time, I'll wake up and I'll go for a run, and then I'll come back and I'll have breakfast and a cup of coffee, whether it's decaf or regular, and that tends to be an hour and a half, 2 hours later. But something to think about for that afternoon sleepiness. Um, okay, and then we should mention alcohol, because a lot of people enjoy a glass of wine at night, and will say, well, I sleep better once if I have a glass of wine or beer or mixed drink. And while alcohol can often help us fall asleep better, it affects our sleep architecture. In other words, it affects our stages of sleep, and it is not recommended to try to use alcohol to go to bed with, because you might be a little bit sleepy when you first have it, but then as it is processed, it gets more activating and will not allow you to have a good night's sleep.
Yeah, it's almost like, well, I mean, you hear this word intoxicated, and even if you don't think that you're drunk or anything, you're still intoxicated because alcohol is a toxin.
Mhm.
And anytime we have toxins in our body is always trying to detoxify things. And at night, that's probably what it's going to be doing with that glass of wine is trying to detox it and maybe interfere with your sleep.
Right. That's a good point. And so if you're going to have a glass of wine, for example, try to make it, not just an hour before you go to bed, but have it with dinner. And hopefully you're not eating dinner late, because we've already talked about the benefits of your guests on other episodes have talked about benefits of time-based eating, time-restricted eating, et cetera, to have dinner on the earlier side. And maybe that's when you look at Dan Buettner's work with the blue zones, and they talk about wine at 5, which is oftentimes in the blue zones you'll see people who, if they do have a drink, they'll do it with loved ones, and they'll do it with dinner, and they'll do it early. It's not having drinking beers into the late night. That's just asking for trouble.
Mm.
So just a couple more recommendations before we run out of time. But have a wind down routine, because sleep isn't an on and off switch for most of us. And so it's, is it turn off the electronics, turning down the lights, like we talked about earlier, taking a warm bath, like we talked about, reading a book, having some aromatherapy, and things like that, so that your body knows is seeing these cues, and you're like, oh, yep, this is what happens right before I go to bed. And then take the clock faces out of the bedroom is a good one, because checking what time it is when you're not falling asleep just leads to more anxiety and more staying awake. So if you can do that, put the clock facing away from you on the other side of the room or in the next room, so you can still secure the alarm when you need to in the morning. And then keep the phone out of the bedroom if at all possible, because it's very easy to say, well, I'm just going to check a couple more emails.
Mm.
Just check a couple of more times to see if what's going to be on Be Green with Amy tomorrow, and we're putting off our sleep. We're having sleep procrastination. And the other part is, of course, that all the anxiety that comes from checking it in the middle of the night, and then also knowing that we're going to be checking it first thing in the morning when we wake up. So the further we can get away from that, the better it is for our sleep. Yeah, so those are the kind of the short and quick for the sleep hygiene. And I know we are basically out of time, but I did want to say that with insomnia, this is another level of poor sleep, either falling asleep, staying asleep, or waking up too early. And the treatment of choice is, first line is cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia. So these are therapists who have special training in helping you to see what mind processes are you doing that is making your sleep worse. And so whatever the cause of your insomnia was, now things are probably worse because of how you process and think about it. So they work with the thinking, they work with all the sleep habits that we just talked about. They also do interesting things where they recommend how you can, well, if you're in bed for 8 hours, but you're only asleep for 4, then what we're going to do is we're only going to let you be in bed for 4 hours plus a little bit extra. And then little by little, you're really just associating being super tired when you go to bed, and so you fall asleep right away. And little by little, you tack on more and more time until you're sleeping a normal amount of time. And this is best done with the specialist who can walk you through it and make sure it's a safe process to do as well.
Wow, you had so many great tips. I hope that somebody will take away something that might be helpful to them. Of course, you are with plant-based telehealth, and you do telehealth consultations, which is kind of like what we are today. We're talking to each other. Of course, you wouldn't have pink in the background, but that's what people could do with you. And one of the things I want you to talk about a little bit, but one of the things, of course, by adopting a plant-based lifestyle, which is what you promote, sometimes some of the prescription medications that people are on, they could have side effects that could interfere with their sleep. And you are expert at trying to get people titrated down or even eliminating some of these prescription medications through diet and lifestyle. And that could be a game changer for people too. So why don't you tell us about what you do at Plant-Based Telehealth and how we can find you?
Thank you, Amy, for your plug. I appreciate you telling more about what we do. So there are 11 of us docs at Plant-Based Telehealth right now. We cover almost all 50 states. We're going to be at 50 states again real soon. Basically, if you're interested in learning how to make healthy choices with diet, exercise, sleep, stress, community, etc., how to make the best choices for your body to help you and loved ones get off of medications and lead the healthiest, longest life that you can. See which of us are available in your state, and then we can schedule a phone appointment. That's a video phone appointment, and typically appointments are 30 or 60 minutes long, which is, I think, a big benefit for folks who are frustrated with the 10 or 15-minute visits that they're often getting from very busy clinics that have the model of thankfully seeing a whole bunch of patients, but oftentimes not having quite the amount of time that you might need to talk about all the things that are important to your health. And so we really focus on trying to, if you're on medications that you don't need to be, to getting you off of them, because it turns out that a pill cannot replace a healthy diet, can't replace sleep, can't replace exercise. Even these powerful sleep medications that are controlled substances by the government, and you have to have a special license to prescribe them. When you look at the studies, they add like 5, 6, 8 minutes of sleep time, 10 minutes of sleep time to your entire night. So why are we going to depend on something that has sometimes life-threatening side effects for an extra 5 to 15 minutes of sleep a night? So we can do better than that, and we're here to help walk you through it, because it's not always an easy journey.
Right. And you also go outside of the United States as well, right? You have.
That's right. We can do consultations for folks who are living outside the U.S. as well, and we have providers that speak Spanish and French and do sign language and speak Hebrew. So we have multiple languages covered and stuff.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And what I like about it is because a lot of especially, it seems like a lot of plant-based doctors are becoming what they call concierge, where you have to have a subscription for maybe a year at a time, and you have to pay by the month or something. Where with plant-based telehealth, if they just want to dip their toe in the water and have just a consult or just a short session, it could be a one and done and just to see if they like it, and then they don't have to pay for a year-long subscription.
That's true. That's true. I think there are benefits to committing to a 3 or 6 month deal, and maybe someday we're going to have that. But right now, like you said, you can schedule one appointment, and if you at the end of that appointment say, "I never want to talk to that Dr. Pierce again," you don't have to, and you don't have to pay any more money. But hopefully, it would be something that is an enjoyable experience, that you get something helpful to take away.
Yeah. And we did have a question, which we don't have time for, about the benefits of the plant-based lifestyle versus the keto, but somebody could actually talk to you about that in the consultation and learn about that and see that why you promote that lifestyle. They can also follow you on Instagram at Dr. Jeff Pierce as well, and see the kinds of foods that you eat and the activities that you do. And then plant-based telehealth is also on Instagram too. Is there anything else you wanted to talk about?
I think that's it. I would just say, remember that sleep is not something that we can just do when we die. If we're not sleeping the amount that we should be, we're going to meet our end even sooner. So remember that it's the foundation to health. The foundation to health, along with good diet, good exercise, and that we should, I think, give good attention to something that has been part of our evolution all these years. So it must be beneficial to us. So let's pay attention to it.
Yeah, Rochelle said, wonderful presentation. And T said, great interview. Thank you, Dr. Pierce and Amy. Be strong, be well, be green. And Skylo said, that's terrific. There's a lot of great comments coming in for you, and I just want to display some of them now so that you could see them, because I think it's really very nice that people are making those lovely comments. And so I really wanted to thank you, Dr. Pierce, for teaching us about sleep and providing us with helpful tools to get better sleep. And I also want to talk to the audience. If you guys can type in the comments and tell us what you're going to remember, what's your takeaway, and then that'll help people who are looking at this broadcast later to see if they want to get anything out of it, that can definitely help them. And please stay tuned for a special announcement. I also wanted to thank Just Tat's Voice, because she did the countdown, and she also did the promos, and she did the thumbnails for Dr. Pierce and a lot of other really great things. And Just Tat's Voice, tell us who's coming up next.
Need delicious, simple, inexpensive, easy, whole food plant-based recipes that are SOS free? Esther, Ben, and Al will show you how. Join us on Friday, September 16th, 3 p.m. Eastern, noon Pacific, on Be Green with Amy Live.
Well, most of all, I want to thank all of you that are watching and listening and liking and sharing and subscribing. Dr. Pierce and I, we both really embrace this whole food plant-based lifestyle, and also the other pillars of health, including what we talked about today, which was the importance of sleep. And we want you to share that with other people because there are people that don't know about this and need to know. So I really appreciate that. And all of you, if you can just take your right hand and grab your left shoulder and take your left hand and grab your right shoulder and now squeeze. And that's a hug from me to you. And if you'd like to join me with Dr. Pierce, he's going to be talking about my tagline, which is be strong, be well, and be green. And you can type that in the comments as we're saying it. So are you ready, Dr. Pierce?
Ready.
Okay. Well, until I see you guys again, remember, be strong, be well, and be green. Bye, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Pierce.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Now you can listen to Be Green with Amy expert interviews wherever you go. Listen while walking, meal prepping, or traveling. Find Be Green with Amy on Apple, Google, Alexa, Amazon, or virtually anywhere you find podcasts. Be strong.